Russia invading Ukraine was not state-sponsored terrorism. That was just a military invasion. That's just an invasion with your military, you know. Terrorists don't annex your country. That's very much a state thing. Hasan.
Saying he personally ordered these strikes.
This is straight up terrorism. When Putin says, oh, well, you know, what goes around comes around, you shouldn't have blew up our bridge. And I saw plenty of people saying, well, that's technically infrastructure. It's valid to blow that up. Ultimately, it goes back to who struck the first blow. And the country that struck the first blow is still Vladimir Putin, is still Russia. So what ended up happening is, regardless, state-sponsored terrorism in the form of state war, military action, started when Vladimir Putin decided to invade Ukraine. What Ukraine did in blowing up the Crimean bridge was also a ridiculous act of war.
I don't get how. It's a legitimate military target. Okay, so, okay, the term state-sponsored terrorism gets used like a lot. Everyone makes the joke about how like, oh, terrorist, I think you mean freedom fighter. And the honest truth is, it's true. There's not really a set definition for like terrorism. It's generally accepted as like a politically motivated attack on a civilian population for the purpose of, you know, some kind of political outcome. But like it varies so much and we use it in so many ways. The thing is like the term state-sponsored terrorism has a bunch of different definitions that like get misused a lot, all right? When I think of state-sponsored terrorism, I think of one of two things. Like two things apply, okay? I think of a state literally sponsoring an ordinary terrorist attack. And I think of a state using its military apparatus to act identically to a terrorist. So example one, Saudi Arabia kind of sort of sponsoring 9/11, right? Like, it wasn't the Saudi Arabian Air Force that 9/11 does, but like, you know. So yeah, like state-sponsored terror, right? The United States has sponsored a ton of terrorism in Latin America, all throughout the Cold War, you know? But then I can also think of something like what Israel does, where Israel will do deliberate, directed, politically motivated attacks against Palestinian civilians. And it will do so, like, they'll do, like, identical to what terrorists do, but they're doing it as a military. So those are the two kinds of state-sponsored terrorism that I think of. So Russia invading Ukraine was not state-sponsored terrorism. That was just a military invasion. That's just an invasion with your military, you know. Terrorists don't annex your country. That's very much a state thing. However, Russia indiscriminately shelling Kyiv a couple days ago as retaliation for the bombing of the Crimean bridge, I would consider that state-sponsored terrorism, because the only reason they were doing this indiscriminate shelling was as revenge against a civilian population. That was the point. That was the purpose of what they were doing. They were gloating about it. I mean, they were bragging, you know. What Ukraine did to the Crimean bridge is definitionally not state-sponsored terrorism. Bridges, especially ones that are being used to transport military equipment, are extremely legitimate military targets. Like, if a bridge isn't, then what is, right? If that's not a legitimate military target, I don't know what, like the tank making factory, like what would be at that point, you know? Civilians may die in an attack on a legitimate military target. That's unfortunate. It's also just what happens during war, you know? You should make an effort to minimize civilian casualties when possible, something that Russia has not really been doing. But it's not like you're going to have a bunch of Ukrainian operatives go over to a bridge that's like serving as a transport for military equipment, and they're going to place the bombs on the bridge supports, and then they're going to like wait there for 8 hours until there's nobody on the bridge. You know, they're going to be like, okay, we got it. Like, that's just not, like, realistically, that's just not how war works. That'd be like doing a bombing run on, like, enemy rail lines or a factory or something, and, like, the bomber, like, looks down below, and they're like, oh, sorry, there's a guy on the tracks, like, do another flyby, you know. It just doesn't work that way. So I don't think what Ukraine did there was bad at all, or state-sponsored terrorism in any, you know, in any fashion.
I don't care if you get mad at me for saying this. Blowing up civilian infrastructure.
It's not. it's it, it, there are rules of conduct for war, and a bridge is defined as a legitimate military target. It wasn't like a footpath bridge in a park. Do you think if the method changed to something like an airstrike, people would be less likely to call it terrorism? Well, Russia simps wouldn't. Maybe Hasan would. I don't really know. I don't think of Hasan as like a Russia simp, by the way. I disagree with some of his perspectives here, but he's not like Michael Tracy or whatever. Yeah, yeah. That bridge didn't exist before Russia annexed Crimea. It was literally built by an invader. Yeah, it was built by the invader, and it's being used to transport military equipment. I don't know what
that civilians utilize because military equipment passed through it. The bridge was used for a Russian.
All infrastructure is used by civilians. There is like no infrastructure that isn't. Even military bases have contractors on them. Everything on Earth, except for like top secret locations, I get like very specific installations, are used by civilians to some capacity or another.
Russian military sources, I know there are a lot of civilian targets and civilian infrastructure that oftentimes are valid targets.
Do you think the method used to blow up the bridge matters? No, I don't. I don't think that makes any difference at all. That's just an aesthetic thing, you know.
Rules the war. I think what Russia did in Western Ukraine is worse than what Ukraine did in Crimea. But I still think that what Ukraine did in Crimea is bad. Of course, what Russia is doing is significantly worse. What Russia has been doing since day one is significantly worse because they are the ones who are invading. None of this would happen if they hadn't invaded. This is why my main point has always been, this is why war is awful across the board, because civilians end up getting killed in the process.
I guess I just don't understand why it's just such a clearly defined legitimate target. I don't know what a target would have to be more legitimate than that.
Sit here and fucking act like, bombing civilian targets and civilian infrastructure is ultimately a good thing and justifiable. You know what I mean? Like, that's crazy. The main perpetrators of the circumstance are, of course, the Russian forces and Vladimir Putin. I don't think anyone has an issue with that take. I mean, or if you do, you're a fucking psycho.
I don't know. I don't know. I don't even know what retort you could really offer. Because civilians use it at all, I guess. I mean, so the problem that I have with this is that, like, there's a very clear historical analog that we have here. And this is the Allied bombing of the German rail lines, right? See, when Germany started properly losing the war, Allied forces ran bombing runs all over German territory. And one of our targets was, of course, the rail lines, because the rail lines were used by the military to transport equipment, fuel, munitions, ammunition all around the country. By blowing them up, of course, we prevented them from internally reinforcing themselves and engaging in proper internal logistics. And Nazis have since claimed not only that this was one of the reasons why Jews died during the Holocaust, because they were peacefully interned and we kept food from getting to the camps by blowing up the lines, which is complete bullshit, but not only have they claimed that, but also that it was a war crime to destroy those rail lines because they were like, civilian infrastructure, which those rail lines were as much civilian infrastructure as that bridge is in Crimea, because those rail lines did, of course, have civilian passenger lines running along them. They also had vital military logistical significance, and for that reason, they were considered legitimate targets. If we can't do stuff like that, then what can we attack? Like ever, right? I don't know what we'd be able to attack. Is blowing up ports similar to blowing up bridges and rail? Well, yeah, it's vital infrastructure, and ports are used by both civilian and military. Like, think of ports in the United States, right? Like, even military, like naval bases have civilian ships that run through them all the time for transport or variety of reasons. Airports get used jointly. I just, yeah, whatever.